All right, we have so much news for you tonight. We could actually use 2 hours, but we're only going to take one. We have an infuriating opening segment for you. Congress, get this, is spending your money to cover up sexual harassment and some major developing stories for you on other fronts. President Trump returned moments ago from his 12-day trip to Asia. We're going to have a report about what he's doing next. And why are immigration agents complaining about the president? We'll tell you that as well. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions testified today before Congress about possible investigations into Hillary Clinton and that Uranium One deal. What's coming? Well, we'll tell you. But first, our top story, pulling back the curtain, sexual harassment inside the halls of Congress and how you're paying for the secret settlements. Sexual misconduct scandals have engulfed Hollywood, media, and now politics with the Roy Moore revelations. But did you know that you've been funding payoffs for congressional harassment claims for decades? According to the Congressional Office of Compliance, between 1997 and 2014, hundreds of women have been paid $15.2 million in total in awards and settlements for Capitol Hill workplace violations. The House Administration Committee held a hearing on the matter yesterday.
In fact, there are 2 members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, right now, who have been subject to review or not have been subject to review, but have engaged in sexual harassment.
This member asked a staffer to bring them over some materials to their residence. And the young staffer, is a young woman, went there and was greeted with a member in a towel. It was a male, who then invited her in. At that point, he decided to expose himself. She left, and then she quit her job.
Joining us now for reaction here in Washington is Jenny Beth Martin. She's the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She has a new piece on this growing scandal. And Scott Bolden, former chairman of the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C., and a former sex crimes prosecutor. Jenny Beth, let's start with you. This is so ridiculous.
It's outrageous.
$15.2 million. And this was started by Senator I really respect and admire, Chuck Grassley. What was the thinking behind this? And we'll go into the procedures that women have to go through.
Well, it was part of the Congressional Accountability Act, which, you know, looking back on, yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that, well, at the time they were trying to make Congress live under the laws that they had passed, including Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. They were trying to make sure that they lived under several other laws, and they also wanted to create something to deal with sexual harassment. But in doing this, they have instituted a culture of corruption, and they have created much more intimidation for people who want to step forward.
Scott, let me share this with you. This is the Office of Compliance, the steps a woman has to go through to file a complaint.
Sure.
First, the victims get, I think we have a graphic, 180 days to complain. Okay, that's not bad, but you should get a little bit more if you're traumatized. Victims who want to continue must start 30 days of mediation. So they force you into mediation. Then finally, the Office of Compliance Administration does a hearing, or you can file a federal lawsuit, and it's all confidential. The problem, of course, is pushing women into mediation, and it seems to be geared toward stopping the claim. If I look at this as a former attorney, this is kind of pushing women, oh, you don't really want to file this, 30 days of mediation.
Well, this is all about power, and within that mediation, it's also a counseling piece. And when I first read this, I said, what are they counseling the women on? Either this happened or it didn't happen. But again, this is all about power. Remember, elected officials on the Hill are products, if you will. And this, the other thing that you didn't show was the lack of disclosure unless they go to court. So this is all very confidential. And it's all about taking care of each other as opposed to pulling the sheets off of it, if you will, and saying, listen, we got a problem. I think the Republicans and the Democrats on the Hill have a chance to lead by fixing this.
It's a slush hush fund.
I call it the shush. The shush.
Right.
Yeah,
don't say anything.
And it's actually mandatory counseling. And if you've been traumatized, do you really want your employer mandating that you must go to counseling before you can go to mediation?
So now the Senate is working on mandatory sexual harassment training in the Senate. The House still hasn't really been able to push through changes. I know Congresswoman Spire, who I usually don't agree with on much, but she's right on this. They want to get rid of that wait time for being able to push through and actually file an actual complaint.
But Laura, you know, in the reformation or the amendment to this legislation on both sides, you've got to make it uncomfortable for bad behavior. You have to be intentional about it. One of the most shocking things you led with was that the public tax dollars are paying for these settlements.
$15 million.
Exactly. That's about $1 million a year, a little less than $1 million a year. And you know what? If you remove that rule and made the congressmen either get employment defense insurance or made them pay out of their campaign PAC funds and stuff, I tell you, you would force a lot less of this bad behavior because that hits them where their pockets are.
I have a question. There was a point in this research that I was reading today that apparently a congresswoman was warning about the congressmen who sleep in their offices. Like those are the ones you have to. I mean, I don't know if that's fair because I know some who sleep in there. They're great people,
Right.
But apparently that's a problem. What is really going on here, though? Like, what is it? Just the usual stuff where you get into a position of power. Maybe you were kind of a geeky guy in high school or college.
Right.
You didn't really have a lot of chicks, and then you get to Capitol Hill. It's all these 22-year-old gals running around, and this is nothing new. I mean, I remember being in the White House elevator during the Reagan administration, and Strom Thurmond made a few interesting comments to me, and that, I was 22 years old, and I just was like laughing at it. It's not a big deal. But you also don't want to chill the workplace either. That's another thing I am a little bit worried about here, where you can't even say to someone, "Oh, you look great, nice dress." Like, people are afraid. I know now men who are afraid to have any interaction at any time with a woman alone because 10 years later, even if you didn't do anything, you can be accused of something. Then where do you go to defend yourself? You can't defend yourself. So we have to look at the other side here as well and not make it so sterile and antiseptic a workplace that no one even enjoys the job. You're so afraid of saying anything.
Right. Well, you always have to be careful because the plaintiff's bar has made it that way. The reality, though, is that women are standing up now in the last 6 months to a year and saying, "Me too." And I think that's the difference because as you see each of these industries go with these disclosures, whether it's Hollywood or some other industry, now you're seeing the government. And now if the government who enforces and makes laws, if they won't lead on this, then I got to tell you, we're in the space of the hypocrisy bucket, if you will.
Grassley said it's, if this law isn't working, you should revise it, change it. I mean, I guess after the Packwood thing, they thought this was actually going to accomplish something. But why did it take so long for this to get so much notice? It's just Harvey Weinstein and all the other stuff swirling around. I guess it's just what people are talking about. So now, like, okay, Congress, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think that may be some of it, and now we're getting a little bit of light shed on it. Until a week and a half ago, I didn't even know this fund existed. But I tell you what, it's intimidating. If you're a woman who truly has been harassed by a member of Congress, you need to be able to address that and to have it handled, not be told you must go to counseling, you must go to mediation, we're going to have you sign an NDA, you can never tell anyone. It's all designed to shame the woman. Whether they intend to or not, you wind up shaming the victim. And I understand also you've got to make sure.
Harvey Weinstein went around trying to get non-disclosures too, right?
Yeah.
Well, he paid a lot of money also.
He paid a lot of money.
Well, and 15...
and let's not forget, men and young boys have been
victimized here.
Victimized, abused, and oftentimes this happens in Hollywood, but not only Hollywood. It happens in the theater. And I've been hearing about this for a long time. We're talking about Congress because, we're here in Washington and they're the ones supposed to be the lawmakers. But this is across the board. And it's people in positions of power who usually have some problem within themselves. They're either they have no self-esteem or their father didn't love them. I don't know what it is, but they don't know how to treat people. And maybe, just maybe, we'll learn how to treat people better.
Well, that transparency that we're talking about and Congresswoman Spire's talking about, it's going to make it uncomfortable. This is a place of power. Careers are made or lost. And so you've got to make it a safe space for women and men who are victimized by sexual harassment to come forward, to be protected, and quite frankly, if there is transparency, I think you see less bad behavior.
There are people who make false charges. That does happen. And you can't just say anyone who makes a charge, we're going to throw laurels around your neck. I mean, it's not necessarily the case. I mean, you do have a presumption of innocence. And sometimes I think in this climate, It's so white hot. I'm not talking about Roy Moore. I'm talking just in general. It's so white hot that if a woman who seems fairly credible makes a charge, your career's over.
Yeah, you know,
your career's over.
You have to allow people, if you've been accused of it, you have to be given the opportunity to defend yourself and to clear your name. And you can't just try everything in the court of public opinion. There has to be a proper process.
And is that where the
it.
confidentiality comes into play? Well, I mean, are you going to go into Congress and have all these interns running around if you think that, my gosh, at any moment, you know, I open the door for someone, or I'm going to be accused of being demeaning or it's. You got to be careful how you do this, because
exactly.
you could go way overboard on the other side.
But one way to address that issue is, as a former sex crimes prosecutor, we would require corroboration. I mean, the cases where it's one person's word against another, there's no scientific evidence, there's no corroboration whether there was more than a sexual touching or not, it still has to be corroborated. And I think that standard would be good in Congress, too, because then you'd have that balance, if you will, because the congressmen want to get reelected, okay? They don't want bad press, and they don't want to have to go defend their conduct. I have a question about
that with the sex crimes. In how many cases, where it's usually men, of course, are accused of sex crimes, domestic abuse, is substance abuse involved? How often?
You know what? Quite a bit. I mean, you're testing my memory, but I would say not the majority, but at least over 50%.
Really, not the majority, I would say.
Well, over 50%. I just don't know how much. But there are other socioeconomic factors that come into play. And the other thing is getting women to come forward and prosecute if the father and the husband is the top breadwinner or is needed at home with the kids. I got to tell you, some women in that position just don't feel like they have many choices, and they drop charges against the very people who have abused them.
Well, and a lot of times abuse is simply about power. It's not about,
it's not about
substance
sex.
abuse. It's not even about sex. It's about power, raw power.
You guys, great to see you. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.